Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us on this session, where we're going to be focusing on supporting research and technical careers. Very, very important topic, and we've touched on it already earlier in the sessions. My name's Julia Buckingham, and I'm going to be chairing this session, and I'm doing this in my capacity as the chair of the Researcher Development Concordat Strategy Group. And I'm delighted this morning to be joined by Nick Ogorisco from UKRI. He's a senior talent manager there. David Moon and Richard Brooks from the University of Bath. David is an academic and Richard is the director of HR at Bath, and they're going to do a duet. So they're going to be talking, hopefully not together, but having a conversation with each other. And finally, Paul Gilbert, who leads the Technicians Commission for the University of Liverpool. And we're going to follow the format we've been following throughout the conference. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with this. So questions in the Q&A, and we will monitor those and try and answer as many as we possibly can at the end. But please do use the chat box to speak to each other and make any other comments that you want. And we are, of course, recording the webinar, and it will be put on the UUK events page as soon as it's all completed. So you should receive an email from UUK to let you know when you can tune into it there. So today's goal then for this particular session is to talk about practical solutions to support career progression in research and technical roles in academia. And we're going to be showcasing some examples where innovation and collaboration between different stakeholders has successfully led to providing new and different ways to supporting career progression and tackling that really very long-term problem of job precarity. And I say that with feeling, because when I was a young postdoc, that situation of job precarity was not too dissimilar from what it is now. And of course, it's a hugely important issue. It's very, very unsettling for staff, and it's not good for research either. As we heard from Melanie earlier this morning, we need to attract and retain talent desperately into our research base. But I don't think we're going to be a very attractive community to people from within and outside the UK if we can't offer really good career paths to support those researchers in the broadest sense of the term, whatever their role in the research ecosystem, to see that they have got really good careers. But I think, it's time now to start trying to address the problems, which I think people are trying to do. And there are many examples of positive change going on in the sector. But of course, it's not uniform. We are seeing examples of improvements in employment practice, with some institutions, for example, looking at providing open-ended contracts. We're seeing institutions looking at opportunities to promote people within the tenure of a grant. Looking at the review we've done of the Researcher Concordat development reports, we can see that more institutions are looking at proper appraisal with a focus on the development and career planning of individuals. They're looking to improve career advice, which I think has always been a huge weakness in the university sector for our researchers. We do it very well for students, but I don't think we do it so well for our staff. And of course, with the Researcher Development Concordat, there is a requirement for institutions to allow our researchers 10 days every year for professional development. And there are all sorts of different ways in which people can use that time. But it is really, really important they do use that time and use it in a way which is going to help them develop their career. We've seen lots of examples of things that people are doing, like, for example, short internships in industry for people looking to move outside academia and into the private sector. People getting teaching experience if they're aiming to become an academic. And of course, if you become an academic, as we all know, that involves a lot of teaching as well as doing research. So some very, very good examples of things happening. But we know, of course, the experience across the sector is variable. And we've still got, as I said at the beginning, a very, very long way to go to make sure that we really have a good career structure for our early career researchers. It's hopeless to be having all this talent and then seeing it move away from the sector, and very often moving away from research. And we simply can't afford for that to go on happening. So I'm looking forward now to hearing some comments and thoughts from our panel members. And Nick, I'm going to start with you.
Hey, thank you very much, and excellent job on pronouncing my surname. Not the easiest thing. So I've got some slides to share, which hopefully you're seeing now, and you're not seeing the presenter screen. So one of my panel members wave at me if that's not the case. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of background, actually, the causes of the issue and kind of where we sit on it. So if anyone doesn't know, UKRI, the Quintessence Graphic, we are the kind of main research funder for the largest public research funder. We invest over £7 billion a year across the Research Council, across Innovate UK, across Research England, which is focused on England, and that function is replicated by Scottish Funding Council, Heffian Department for the Economy in Northern Ireland. And for us, actually, this is a major issue, and two things I pick out. Both, it's an issue for the people involved personally, and it's an issue for the system as a whole. And very recently, we have seen the Science and Technology Select Committee publish inquiries on diversity and inclusion, on reproducibility and research equity, both of which mention the impact of precarious careers, precarious contracts. So we know this is affecting people at an individual level, it's affecting the quality and the robustness of the kind of system as a whole. And unfortunately, every time we'll come to a discussion about actually what the drivers of this are and what the kind of causes are, it generally tends to look like this. We all point fingers for each other, and actually we need sort of a combined approach and more collaboration to look across this issue. But a bit of the background for what we think is driving some of the behaviours, and this will come up a little bit later with hopefully Paul's talk, is actually it's what we reward and the kind of career pathways we have in academia. I mean, right now, what we have is a very, very linear pathway, which is generally limited to just academics. And as soon as you're off it, you're considered to have failed. The transition is poorly supported to any other roles, and any other roles within the academic environment tend not to have a career pathway attached. It is just this single one. And transition to these roles, or to any roles outside of academia, to industry, to other employers like UKRI, which is the transition I made in my postdoc, tend to be poorly supported because the culture of supporting people to anyone else is just not there, because again, the culture is that this is failure, and it's absolutely not. And actually what drives, what kind of gets you further up this pathway is largely has been for a long time publications. And what I'd raise here, and this is a bit of a caricature again, is that actually it's the hypothesis and methodology of your study, which is within your control, but actually that's not what's rewarded by a publication. And this is kind of the reason behind, and it's like Dora Core and so many programs within UKRI, and you might have heard some of that earlier. And I think this drives a specific kind of dynamic where we have everyone chasing our publications. We have people within this little silo, really tunnel visioned onto this. And all of the other roles that are important for supporting research fall outside this. And we have a very, very clear kind of distinction between academics and everyone else. And so we have this kind of second-class citizenship that really becomes embedded in the culture. So if you dare to step off of this kind of academic pathway that you've internalized, obviously you're going to consider this as failure. And so you are conditioned to really chase a kind of PI pathway, which we know there's enough roles available for. And also worth to mention that actually this bit does count as academics as long as you want to stay in academia. And as soon as you say you don't, then you're in this other camp. So part of the precarious contracts, part of the issue is not just actually the contracts and the grants, but also this culture of actually, I want to be a PI and I want to be anything else, and I will drive myself more to chase this goal above everything else. Obviously, the contract issue does play a role, but a lot of this issue is cultural and what we kind of believe, what we kind of are conditioned to believe. I won't say whether kind of money was the answer. And this got looked at quite a while ago, and as far as I know, there hasn't been an update since specifically on this. But actually, a previous committee suggested that actually wasn't the availability of funding, but the management of financial risk. And actually, there's nothing in our grants, for example, that says a postdoc has to be linked to a specific piece of funding. And the bit that helps with that is the postdoc population tends to grow year on year. Each year we have more postdoc positions than the previous, obviously accounting for blips like the pandemic. And so actually there isn't a shortage of postdoctoral positions, but there is a shortage of really trying to foresight when these are going to come up and take a more strategic approach to when you're thinking about people, when you're thinking about your postdoctoral kind of community. I'd say as well that the new research around Concordat has been one of our grant conditions since early 2020, the first iteration since it was published. And if researchers were being prepared for a range of careers, then it should be much easier to redeploy them to a range of projects or a range of roles within your institution. So we published a new plan for the research of Concordat, and we've combined it with our work on the technician commitment. So people and teams plan. And actually, it's structured on 4 pillars, and one of the main ones is what we reward, and trying to think, there's a huge lot of detail about the actions we want to take about what we're going to be rewarding in grant applications in our block funding. And again, you heard a little bit about that earlier today. There is a whole section on precarity and how all the actions will add up to these, and I've tried to summarize them here. Basically, we want to incentivize more diverse staffing models and encourage more pooled staff and cross-cutting roles in how we assess grant funding. We want institutions to kind of develop a range of career pathways and a range of ways of staffing grants to recognize the kind of broader contributions activities that we assess in grants and track records. For example, how is the applicant going to support the careers of their team? What kind of networks have they built that people can use to build their own career, and to set stronger expectations of actually redeployment between staff as a way of encouraging institutional ownership of staff development. You can see much more of the detail in the plan itself, and I don't want to go through too much here because I've only got 8 minutes. I'm probably over time already. So that's all I've got today, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. That was great. And I think it set a very nice background for the discussions, and very good points there. We're going to move on swiftly to our next 2 speakers, who I said earlier are going to do a duet. So David and Richard, over to you.
Thank you. I'll share my screen when we've got some text up, but yeah, Richard and I have spoke about this beforehand, and it wouldn't make sense for us to sort of give separate talks. It'd be a little bit too binary. I mean, part of the message, I think, of what we want to talk about is how it's actually through debate, not or deliberation, or really negotiation to get there. So I should introduce myself before Richard. So my name is Dr. David Moon. I'm a senior lecturer in politics, but I'm here specifically in my capacity that I have until a week and a half ago been the branch president of UCU at the University of Bath, in which role I've been engaging with Richard as director of HR in negotiations which have led to an anti-casualisation agreement. I don't know if you want to say something, Richard. Otherwise,
I think you just introduced me, Di. Thank you. Carry on.
Good. So, yeah, part of the very fact that we're just going to have this conversation, I think, speaks to the positive message I want to get across here, which is that it is possible to reach what I believe from a UCU perspective, and Richard, I'm sure, believes from a senior management HR perspective, is a good agreement, which does a lot of things we want to see, which we can drive forward. I'd start by saying this was not automatically something we're going to achieve. We first put in a claim as a UCU branch in 2018. For those of you who can think back that far, 2017, 2018 was the year at the University of Bath that saw student protests pelting our council office windows with biscuits and an occupation strike action. It was a heady time. So the fact that we entered into negotiations around this, and we managed to do so in good faith, and through a series of steps worked towards an agreement, an agreement which now UCU nationally is recommending as guidance for negotiators elsewhere, I think is a testament to sort of how we got there. I thought it was useful to just give a very brief overview of the route there, share the screen, I think, of what is the major parts, which I think everyone would be interested in, and then Richard can take over with sort of to correct the bits where I've been maybe a bit unbalanced and to talk through any technical elements. So we put forward our original sort of claim in 2018. The thing it's worth noting is that very quickly led to negotiations from which we had a joint statement of values of where we're working to, and then we split this up. I mean, there's been talk in the first section about the importance of PhDs as sort of researchers. The first thing that we looked at was a teaching track focusing in on the graduate teaching assistants and getting them off of hourly paid contracts and into small fractional like employee contracts. And rather than do it all at once, we just did a first section and then moved on to the second section, which really focused in on researchers, postdocs, and their contracts there. It took all in 5 years. It should be noted within that period there was a global pandemic. It should also be noted in that period we also managed to negotiate a professorial pay scale, which is the first time that's been done at a university. So there was a lot going on. But if I can, fingers crossed, share the screen to show in Safari, probably the key, I don't know if you can see my child there as well, or just the, can people see the full Word document, or can you see my background as well?
We've got the Word document.
The Word, that's,
print, yeah.
Thank you, Richard. Not that there's anything on my desktop I don't want you to see, but okay. So there's a lot in the document, and of course it's all out there for anyone to read through, but probably the areas which are the most significant for our conversation here will be section 6.1, but I'd also tie that into sections 5.4 and 5.5 above it. So looking at 6.1, I'll just read it very briefly, but the key sections would be that while recognizing the pressures financially, both agreed that there is scope to test breaking the connection of an individual job to a specific piece of grant funding. To this end, 2 or more pilots will be initiated in 22-23 academic year with a large research group to test the feasibility of a pooled resourcing model, including transfer of staff to open-ended contracts. These pilots will be subject to periodic joint review, and we're looking to a rollout across the university from the academic year should the joint pilots be deemed successful. So that's sort of the first, we've hit a lot of the words which you've just been hearing about there. The second thing I'll point to, very briefly, and then I'll shut up and let Richard talk, is 5.4, where the university and the UCU branch agree more could be done to aid internal redeployment of research and research-related staff. And I'd point out to that as well. It's not just research academic staff, but research-related staff. That matters because I needed to get agreement from our Unison and Unite branches that we were able to essentially negotiate for a group of staff who fall outside of our sole collective bargaining area through a combination of technical policy changes, so to improve stability. And there's a working group on that. We can talk about what that means in principle, because I think that we have an idea of what that means in principle, but it is moving towards a mechanism by which we create a resource by which we can put in information about existing researchers' skills, the time period that's left on their contracts, and we can, with a possibility of bridge funding, find ways that we can avoid researchers leaving early, losing grant money, etc., and instead avoid having to go through recruitment and avoid having to sort of lose money in the early periods, and instead find ways for the people who are already working for us to sort of be written into grants as they go forward as well. And with that, in combination with the pilots that we're running, that's sort of, I think, the key thing people are probably interested in talking about. I'll be quiet now. Richard, what would you like to say?
Sure, Di, so thank you. And I think you covered there a lot of the things where we found very quickly that we agreed on what we were trying to achieve, which was almost a much better deal for staff, which in a way was giving a much better deal for the university, because it was allowing us to develop careers, develop pools of skills of individuals that felt more loyal to the institution, and that continuity, as you pointed out, it means you don't have the financial losses, but also don't have the skills fade and the retraining for people constantly rejoining. So there's a lot of things that we wanted to work through, and it was interesting taking this concept through our leadership team. And I think picking up a point that Nick said earlier, that the barriers here are largely cultural. The barriers here didn't prove to be employment law or financial or risk or anything like that. And one example I would give, when we started talking about taking people off fixed term contracts and putting them on open-ended contracts, which is what we've done in our 2 pilots, there was the impression that that was suddenly bringing the institution into a huge degree of risk, that somehow a fixed term appointment allowed one to completely manage the financial and employment risk and the open-ended contract didn't. And as those who've monitored these things over the last sort of 20 years will know, is that the difference between a fixed term appointment and an open appointment from an employment law point of view has really not entirely disappeared, but faded so much over time. And it's only the cultural way that we approach these things that maintains that difference. And certainly what we've seen is that the impression that it creates for particularly our postdoc workforce, that we're not invested in developing careers, that we're not invested in their long-term future in the organization, was one of the big negatives in all of this. So we could say all we wanted under the Concordat about these things to want to invest in, but while we were constantly saying, but you've now got a 9-month contract, it just belied all of those positive words. So I think that the big change here has been managed to get the mindset to change, and we're only doing this to a couple of pilots. We've launched 2 pilots in some of our more substantive research groups. We demonstrated that these are research groups who've had several years of successful funding, so the risk is relatively low on those. And we will be looking at people's attitude through that process, as well as one of the issues Di mentioned there, whether there is a need to use some bridge funding through this period to be able to maintain people in those research groups. One of the aspects that I'm quite keen on exploring is that the PI leading those research groups is perhaps now got to be thinking more about their running a small business and taking more responsibility for that, because they need to be thinking about future grant applications, where money is coming from, managing their workforce to be able to match future need, rather than just, frankly, just going finding somebody off the shelf when they want them and putting them back on the shelf when they don't want them anymore. What's been really pleasing is that the PIs leading these groups really want to achieve that. There's not been an uphill struggle with the PI. So we're making progress on that. The other thing I would just say, which Di talked about, is a lot of focus has been on the contractual terms, but this is also about how we think about how we develop skills, how we redeploy people, how we look at people moving perhaps between departments or between faculties where they have transferable skills, so that we can make our research workforce feel more part of the overall workforce. And we're only at the beginning of that journey. With the time frame of the current grants, we're not going to learn something from a pilot in 6 months. It's going to take 2 to 3 years to do that. But I think what we've seen is the shock that we expected wasn't there. We've moved into this quite nicely. And I think, as Di said earlier, we will see this as an evolution of the way we do things at university, rather than a step change in contractual terms, because all those other cultural issues need to go alongside it.
I really only want to add one more sentence, which is to emphasize, exactly like Richard said, one of the key things we found is how much we were using different language and often coming from different perspectives, but how much we shared what we were looking to do here. And the second thing I'd say is you cannot underestimate the positivity for the workforce and frankly, our local workforce relations of this sort of work coming together. So, and I say that as Rich and I have another meeting later to talk about MAB issues. So it really is still, I would emphasize that positivity just across the campus. So.
Great. Well, thank you both very much indeed. I mean, it's a super initiative, and I'm sure you're going to get lots of questions about it in a moment when we turn to the panel discussion. But for the moment, thank you both very much indeed. And I'm going to hand it over to Paul, who's our last speaker.
Thank you. And as usual, someone could just let me know if you can see the right screen here once I start presenting it. Are you seeing the correct screen or the presenter screen? Got a thumbs up, got it right. So at the University of Liverpool, I want to sort of talk more about the technical development that we've put in. And I'll give you the first couple of slides. I'll give you a bit of an overview, just very briefly, of who we are at Liverpool, just mainly to emphasize that we're fairly standard university, and we look like a lot of other universities, in that we have 3 main faculties and a central directorate of people, 27,000 students, 6,500 staff. Those numbers are almost certainly wrong, by the way, made up. They change every minute, but we're a fairly, a standard Russell Group research and teaching focused university. And we have the same issues that everyone else has around job precarity and career development. And we have our technicians, over 600 technicians. Again, that number there is going to be wrong by now. But like a lot of other people, hundreds of different role titles, no real description of who our technicians are, how they're supporting research. And we do know a lot of information about where they're based in the organization, what their many roles are, and sort of our demographics. We have that information, but not much more than that. And we signed up to the technician commitment in 2017, I think it was the second wave of signatories. And you will have heard a few things the last couple of days about the technician commitment, the impact it's had nationally across the sector. We introduced our first action plan for technician commitment in 2018. We made sure technicians had a say in it, and as a result, that last sentence there, the technician commitment is now really firmly an institutional agenda. And I say that because it's not a tick box thing. We adopted it and said, right, if we're going to do this, we're going to do a lot with it. We're going to try and really throw ourselves at this. And our action plan here, one of the first, don't worry, I'm not going to go through it. I haven't got enough time for that, and it really will send you all to sleep. But one thing I want to pick out here is this: right from the very beginning, we made sure that we had senior leadership team buy-in, not only to the technician commitment and what we want to achieve, but making sure that everything we tried to do along the way, we had a direct line to senior leadership team at the university and advocacy. And that's important, not for the technician's commitment, actually, it's important for all of the things that are being discussed over the next 2 days. Yesterday and today. It's really important to make sure that all of these development ideas we're thinking about have advocacy right from the very top down. The things we've done with that so far, I'll give you some brief highlights, but I'll come on to the main one in a bit. So we did the obvious things that a lot of places have. We set up a Liverpool Technical Network, which is just a way of communicating to technicians that we understand who you are, and there is a network of you here, and you can talk to each other, engage with each other, share good practice, all of that. We set up a centralized technician development fund, because the biggest issue not the biggest at all, but one of the issues we found very immediately was that technicians and career development don't often go hand in hand for several reasons, but one of them is that there's never any money. Particularly research technicians, research funded technicians, often told, no, there's no money for you to train or undergo career development, CPD, and time is the other one, which I'll come on to. But we set up a central development fund, which was agreed university-wide, and it's ring-fenced. It can only be used for technician development activities, and any technician can apply for any amount of that fund. And their application is sent in and adjudged by the Technician Commitment Steering Group. And we judge it on, is it a sensible request, firstly? But needs to be a real emphasis on knowledge exchange. So we're not going to contribute centralized money for a technician to go off and learn something that isn't relevant to their role and isn't beneficial to the wider department or university. So we've had a real range of applications. It's been really well received, and I think we're currently around about a 70% success rate for applications. And the just under 30% that we don't approve are almost entirely because there's not enough evidence that it's actually benefiting the area that person's works. Some of these things are, we know we fund access to go to conferences and things like that, which is all, we don't need the evidence of wider benefit there. But when it's an individual wanting to undertake training or learning, we're asking, well, actually, how is that benefiting you? How is it benefiting your department? How is it benefiting the University of Liverpool? Those that have been unsuccessful, actually, more often than not, we've gone back and said, look, can you give us more? Can we make this more applicable to the wider area? Because for university centralized money, we do have to evidence that it's being spent wisely. But we've had that in place now for, I think, 3 years, or in the 4th year, I'm not sure. alongside that, we've built a statement of expectations. So we have CPD now as an expectation for all technical staff, and this statement we've published on our website. It says that it is aimed at technical managers and managers of technical staff and all technicians, to say that CPD is an expectation. It's not a luxury. It's an expectation. And you are expected to be allowed a minimum of 10 days per year. Now that 10 days is an arbitrary number, really, but it's a guidance, it's a guideline, and it sets a benchmark. But most importantly, it completely mirrors what we have in place for our research concordat aimed at early career researchers. So we have really good overlap now between the multiple initiatives going on at university, and there's 3 very notable ones there, but we have technical representation on each of those, and we make sure that they all speak to each other. Because ultimately, I mean, you just mentioned from Bath and other, the other talks, a lot of these things, we're all trying to do the same things, actually. It's the same with a lot of these initiatives. The underlying aim is pretty much the same. And so for the statement of expectations for technicians, we said, well, even the language is exactly the same language as used in the Concordat statement of expectations that we published, because they are one and the same. The aims are exactly the same. We're just aiming at certain groups of people so they gain more traction and more visibility. And I'm really pleased to see that overlap of initiatives is, we haven't done it just to say, right, can you go and sit on that committee? It's active. And as we go through our Concordat action plan, we update on the technician action plan and we say, well, where's the overlap here? What are we're certainly not at cross purposes, but we want to make sure that where there's room for overlap, we're not duplicating. We also introduced some fair attribution guidance, so to make sure that technicians are correctly attributed in research output. I can't say we have any data of impact on that yet. I suspect it will be far less than we would hope, but we publish this on our website, and it's agreed from the top down that there is a standard by which non-academic staff should be attributed in research output. We also put this in our action plan. We want to scope the development of a professional career pathway for technicians. Now, lots of other universities have looked at this, and they will all say with the same grimace that this is not easy. It's an incredibly complicated and difficult thing to do. So it's very pleasing that in February this year, we did launch an entirely new career pathway for research technical professionals. That took a few years to get underway, and it was, as you guys in Bath have found, a lot of the hurdles were actually cultural. Everyone realized that actually this is a really good thing, and once those were overcome, things got a lot easier. So that launched in February. It's a specialist pathway up to professorial grade. So what we found is that a lot of specialist roles are on technical. A lot of them were on technical career pathways up to a certain grade, and beyond which they couldn't go any further because they had to take on management or leadership roles, which dilute out the specialism, which is so valuable to us. And the same, this isn't just for technicians, because the same as people from academic backgrounds, often like facility managers for specialist technologies, we're often finding that by being on an academic career pathway after a certain point, they were not being measured against the things that we actually really value them for. So we created a specialist pathway, which allows for career promotion rather than having to move into a new role. And we think this was the first of its kind in the UK. For now, it won't be long, I'm sure. But the idea of this is that it recognises specialist skills, and we value those specialist skills. And all the talk earlier about precarity and losing people with certain skills, that's really one of the biggest drivers here. It's not just to recognise the incredible skill we have in our hands, but also to retain it and nurture it and value it. In terms of the scale here, so we start this pathway at grade 6. Now, grade 7, I know grade boundaries change, the nomenclature changes across the sector, but a grade 7 in our case is what you would consider a standard postdoc grade, and grade 10 would be professorial. So we enter people into this at a grade 6, pretty much at the point, particularly for technicians, where their specialism really is an advanced specialism, and at the point where progression would necessarily mean dilution of that specialism. It's a non-compulsory pathway, so technical or RTPs can move over to this pathway in a sideways move. The terms of the contract don't change, the pension changes necessarily, unfortunately, but it's a sideways move onto a pathway, but potentially opens up progression for them. And it's an application, and you can apply into the pathway as a promotion case as well. But it is judged by a cross-sectional panel that requires evidence of what the role is, professional development, and the specialist value there. Our current progress on this, I mean, we launched this in February. We're only just starting. We have no idea how successful this is going to be yet, but we've had a lot of institutions contact us about it because there's so much will in the sector to do this. But more importantly is the bottom bit. We've already had speculative job inquiries from RTPs from other institutions, which just shows you the value. And echoing again what the guys from Bath have just said, the massive value in actually just saying to RTPs, we want you and we want to develop you. If they're coming to us, then they're going to be going to you if you introduce the same sort of thing. That's really it from me, but I just wanted to emphasize here that from a Liverpool point of view, from the top down, embracing not only the technician commitment and the CORDAT, but all these initiatives where we actually really want to value our staff and change career pathways, it's entirely doable. If we can do it, everyone else can. And the value across the sector, I think, will be huge. That's it from me. So I will end the slideshow and stop sharing my screen.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Paul. That was absolutely splendid, and congratulations on developing such a good system. I think it's fantastic. We're going to open it up now for questions, and just before I turn to the Q&A, I just have a question for David and Richard, which really follows on from what Paul was saying about promotion and the career structure that they've developed at Liverpool for the technicians. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about how you're going to embed that very important aspect of enabling people to progress their careers, not just to stay in a job, but to progress their careers within the structures you're developing in Bath.
Richard, do you want to? The only thing I was going to say before,
yes.
The only thing I was going to say beforehand is we focused in on those sections 4 and 5, but the overall agreement, if people want to look forward, is a lot of what it is drawing together things we already do, things we should do, and frankly, from our perspective as a union, putting it all there so that we have something to point to to kind of make sure things are being done. And a lot of that linking into the research concordat and so forth. So I'd let Richard explain how he sees that functioning, but I didn't want people to think that it was only on that sort of particular technical elements I was talking about.
Sure. So it's an interesting question on the whole career side of things. And I think where we focus at the moment, is it Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you start with sort of security at the bottom. So I think we've started on this. If you can't offer people security, then probably it's more difficult for them to be thinking about the higher steps up that hierarchy. Yeah. But having achieved more of that, this is where I think we're seeing more focus. So we've started to put arrangements in place now where we are seeing people progressing from one grade to another as a researcher within a research group, and making that easier to happen, I think. And we're really expecting PIs to be thinking about that when they're bidding for their next grant. Are there opportunities to develop people and make more use of their skills? So I think that's one important element. We've had a couple of mentions in this as well, also about redeployment of people. And I think there's something about when we're guiding people on how to develop their careers, if they are becoming increasingly specialist, they're likely to be less redeployable. Therefore, we've got to add these other skills rather than just their deep technical specialism, which will allow careers to be developed on a broader landscape. So I think that's a second element to it. And then I think we're probably no different to any other HEI in terms of pathways into lecturer, senior lecturers, etc. appointments. Yeah. But I think what we're starting to see is if we can see our research workforce as a more permanent member of the university, then that step is slightly lower than if they are just coming here for a couple of years and also then trying to make that leap.
Yeah, I just add to that. I mean, within the agreement, it's got the things you would expect about guarantees of time for CPD, for professional development, all of which now we've also discussed the structures to be put in place just to monitor. Actually, there's evidence that's being done. But another thing which I mentioned was we've just negotiated a professorial pay scale at Bath. And one of the key elements within that is that community, being a good citizen, is now heavily weighted in that. And part of that is about the leadership shown by professors who are running research groups, that they are actually doing what they can to build up the people who are working within their teams. And I think, so again, that's outside of the agreement, but it's sort of a key element to get that into promotion criteria as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I mean, it is for many PIs, it's a new role to be looking at this. And I think it's a really, really important part of being a group leader. You are responsible for your team, and it's the team that works together. So I think it's great. And of course, with the Concordat, when we were thinking about the 10 days professional development, it was very much with the thought that the PI should be ensuring that the team are getting proper professional development, they're being encouraged to think about their careers, and they are going off and getting experiences in that 10 days, which are going to help them build the career of their choice, not the career choice of somebody else, which comes back to Nick's point earlier about not everybody wants to be the PI. And we've got a heterogeneous population of researchers, and that's our strength, and we should celebrate it. But I think it's really fantastic what you're doing, but I've talked too much. We must turn to the audience and allow them to have some questions. So Tom, are you going to take us through these?
I'll take us through these. Yeah, no problem. Great, there's lots of questions coming in. So we have a couple for Richard and David. One of them is, well, thanks for showing innovative leadership in this regard. Where was the biggest area of resistance in your culture?
You may get two answers to that, I think. Let me start with my answer, and it builds on the theme that I was talking about earlier in terms of cultural resistance. I think for a lot of our PIs, and let's say perhaps some of our PIs not in the first flush of youth, they've only really known one model. And there is, and it's a model that they have grown up with and are comfortable with and understand how it works. And therefore, trying to introduce a new model, introduce change to anybody is always going to be challenging. And while we've seen people open to it, that I think was the biggest barrier. The fact that almost we are homogenous in the way that we have treated researchers over the years, and we need to have that more heterogeneous way of doing things. And getting people to realize that we can manage the change, we can manage the risk, we can manage their uncertainties through this, which is why we've gone the pilot approach. That's the biggest barrier that I saw.
I'd only build it up from saying it's not only the PIs where that was an issue, although it was, but some elements within senior management who are no longer in senior management. So I feel okay saying that. There was a culture of, well, it never did me any harm. You know, sort of people just would just list off, well, I did this and this and this and this. It's sort of like, well, number one, that's good for you, Jack. But number two, it failed to recognize how the sector's changed as well. It's like it's treating it as though it's all the same. And the second thing I'd add into that, one of the things I think from a union perspective, there was a bit of a struggle sometimes talking to colleagues from HR where the line was, well, we just can't make people do this. Like, it's sort of the culture amongst staff that, well, you know, how can you make academics do anything? And I think there's a sort of a union position, which is automatic go, well, you just make them, like, you know, sort of like kind of almost quite a blunt hammer of like, put the rules and make them do it. And some of this was talking through sort of the softer elements about how to change culture as well. And that means sort of advice which goes out and so forth, rather than sort of strict targets as well. But that's something we work through as well. But it was a source of frustration sometimes. Yeah. How do you get people to do this?
Can I just pick up another point on that? Because it relates to what Julia was saying earlier about people who are responsible for their group. Of course, the advantage of a fixed term appointment is that if somebody's not very good, you can just wait and they'll disappear automatically. And that therefore removes the need to perhaps give performance feedback and manage that individual's performance. And I've often seen that with fixed term appointments, not just in academia, but in lots of organizations. And of course, if we are taking that barrier away, then it is then incumbent on the PI or senior manager in the research group, depending on its size, to actually actively manage that person's performance and give them feedback. And for me, I know that can be scary for some people, but actually they're taking the responsibility for the performance of their group in that way.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And I think appraisal of our researchers is probably a weak area in the sector from my experience, and I'm only talking personally from my experience, but I think it is a weak area. And I guess it's an area where we need to support the PIs in learning how to do that, because feedback given badly is the worst thing possible. But Paul, I can see you wanted to come in on that point.
I just wholeheartedly agree with everything you just said as well. But I was going to respond to David and say that I think when we looked at bringing in our career pathway, we launched it, and we've been very honest and very transparent with our staff and said that we don't know what's going to not work as we try and do it. We're going to find out along the way, but it's better to do that than just assume things won't work and never do anything. But we have had input from a lot of other places, and we have had some negative of basically people not wanting to challenge the existing paradigm because it suits them very well, thank you very much. We have had that, well, you're just going to end up with a load of grade 10 bottle washers type approach, which frankly, the sector has moved on from that approach so much that actually you can almost laugh at it, because I think there's enough will and drive in the sector to move beyond that culture now. And I'm seeing a lot of effort from institutions to say, well, we all want to do this. That culture will go, it will be drowned out by progress. But we've seen that as well. And I just want to address, there's a question in the Q&A actually for Liverpool about any barriers in terms of funding models for the promotion pathway. And of course, that again, status and money are the two things that really show up when you introduce new things. And that did come up. And I think the approach we've taken in Liverpool is that we're doing this because it's right, and the money can follow almost. The numbers of technicians we're talking about that match this pathway and will see immediate elevation through this pathway is actually very, very small. And we're going to cover that from an institutional point of view. We'll say, well, if they're funded on a grant project for however many years at grade, whatever, we're now saying you should be on this grade. Well, we'll cover that. And when it comes to their career, the next stage of their career in terms of funding, or if we advertise roles, they get advertised into this pathway at the grade that we think they're relevant on this pathway. And it's an institutional acceptance that yes, certainly in the short term, this is going to cost us money. But it's money that's well spent. It's money for all of the right reasons. It's not unplanned money. It's money that we weren't spending because we weren't valuing our staff highly enough, really. So yeah, we have encountered some barriers there, and we don't honestly have all the answers to that. They will come as we move through getting people onto this pathway, and we will learn. And the great thing is, I think we'll be very open about what we learn, good and bad.
Great, thank you very much, Paul. I think we've got time for one more quick question. And there's a nice question from Alison Tidy here. And she's saying, as a postdoc, she'd welcome any changes that reduce the precarity of the job. Just throwing this one in for consideration, but do you think this will affect PhD update into the role of postdoc? And if so, are we increasing the training in careers outside academia to both PhDs and postdocs to help change the mindset and highlight that there are plenty of opportunities that their skill set puts them in a good place to be competitive for? Now, I don't know who'd like to tackle that one. Maybe Nick, first of all.
So I think personally, yeah, absolutely. We need to increase training and opportunities for both those groups outside academia. Well, I'd say not just outside academia, I'd say outside academic careers, because we also want them to take part in, for example, the technical career pathway. And diversity of roles. We do need to look at both PhDs and postdocs. In terms of whether it'll have an impact, I'm not really sure. If we look at HESA data, we know postdocs, there's quite a high resignation rate for postdocs as they go and find a new job somewhere else and resign from their position, which was actually a bit of a surprise. From a postdoc background, I kind of assumed postdocs only left when their contract expired, but about 50% of the postdocs that leave are resigning. So I'd say, actually, if we're successful in the career development stuff, in encouraging career conversations, we'd expect that ratio to shift, and we expect even more to resign as they go and find, rather from a push, a pull factor to go and find a new job. So I don't see it as that big of an issue. And from our numbers, I don't think it will be that much of I don't think it's going to keep PhDs out of developing an academic career. I think there'll always be enough turnover for them to kind of go into that. But we won't know, because no one in the Western world has solved this issue. So
yet.
Yeah.
So until we try it, we won't know.
I think you're right.
Time.
Yeah, and there's no way that all our PhDs are going to end up in academia. We train many, many, many more than we're ever going to be able to accommodate in salary posts in academia. And actually, that's good for UK PLC because we want a lot of these people to go and work in industry. A lot of the research and development we're talking about is not going to happen in the academic sector.
Or UKRI. A lot of our staff have PhDs, so.
Well, indeed, but look, I mean, I'm a pharmacologist. We have a huge pharmaceutical industry in this country. A lot of our PhDs are going to go and work there. Ditto biotech, etc. Life sciences is the most expanding industrial field at the moment. So a lot of our researchers are going to go there, which is all the more reason for making sure that we are very, very attractive to keeping them within academia when we want it. Really, really important.
I know we're on time, but I just wanted on response to that, just to plug something you've probably already heard about in the last couple of days is the Prosper at University of Liverpool is entirely about enabling postdocs or researchers into multiple career pathways outside of just academia for that very reason. And actually, as a technical manager, sometimes around 50% of the applicants I get for permanent technical roles are postdocs who've actually realized they don't really want a career justifying their existence by grant income. They just want to be in a lab. So, us training PhDs and postdocs to a great standard benefits technical careers as well, actually.
I think we also recognise that it's not a one-way journey. And
Yeah,
trying to find pathways for people who are out in public sector, private sector, undertaking research type roles. Can we find ways for them to bring that expertise back in later in their career? And we're now seeing a greater growth in that. So I think you're right, it is multiple pathways rather than the traditional one that's probably still drawn in most of our career documents.
Yeah, absolutely. But that doesn't detract from the great work that you're all doing. And I think it's important to remember that. But the program that you talked about, Prosper, Paul, it's absolutely fantastic. And I would recommend all the audience to click on the Liverpool website and take a look at it. It's a really very, very impressive piece of work. And my understanding is it's being rolled out nationally now. But I think it's a fantastic piece of work. But on that happy and positive note, and this has been a really great session. So thank you very much to all of our speakers. We do need to close it down because we're already slightly over. And I'm sure everybody wants a lunch break and perhaps to go and enjoy the fantastic sunshine that we've got, at least where I am. But please don't enjoy it for too long. Do come back and join us this afternoon. And I can see Sanina's put a comment in the chat box if anybody wants the link to Prosper. So fantastic. Thank you all very much indeed. And see you, but not personally, this afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye then.
Bye-bye.